are in for a nasty surprise. Ireland's concerns have become the European Union's concerns, and our insistence on a legally binding and operable solution to avoid a hard border has become an EU red line as well. And in my contacts with the presidents of the EU institutions last week, Presidents Tusk, Juncker and Tajani, I was again assured in the strongest terms that the European Union stands by the withdrawal agreement, including the protocol on Ireland and the backstop therein. This is because the commitment on the border has to be watertight. And despite what some have suggested, nobody in 2 years has identified credible alternative arrangements that can avoid a hard border, protect the all-island economy, the Good Friday Agreement and North-South cooperation. I know that the current political impasse in the United Kingdom is of particular concern for many people north of the border. And it's simply not right that communities and businesses are being held hostage due to political division. In Belfast last Friday, I had the opportunity to hear the views of the 5 main Northern Ireland political parties firsthand, and the Green Party in Dublin the night before. I heard from those who represent the voice of the majority of people in Northern Ireland, who, let's not forget, voted to remain in the European Union. And I also heard from those in the Unionist community who fear that Brexit could loosen the union between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And we need to acknowledge that concern and that fear as well. This is all compounded by the absence of functioning institutions in Northern Ireland for more than 2 years now. And all of the parties confirmed to me their desire to get the institutions up and running. But I don't underestimate the difficulties in making that happen. But the Taoiseach and I stand ready to do anything we can to help, working with the Secretary of State and the British Government. And undoubtedly, a successful conclusion of the withdrawal agreement would help to set the right environment for that. And I really welcome the fact that inter-party talks will take place today in Belfast with the Taoiseach in attendance. Later on Friday evening, I met with Prime Minister May over dinner in Farmley. We discussed Brexit, we discussed the ongoing political situation in Northern Ireland, and also discussed how UK-Ireland bilateral relations might be structured post-Brexit. At present, the relationship is very close. Ministerial counterparts meet each other in Brussels 4 times a year. That's going to end in the next couple of months, and we need to find new mechanisms to continue to ensure that there is structured as well as informal engagement between the 2 sovereign governments in Britain and Ireland. And while it may not have been intended to be the case, perhaps those who framed the Good Friday Agreement created a solution for us in the British-Irish Council and the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, institutions that continue to function, continue to meet, and could be strengthened and could become part of the new relationship that will have to be built between the UK and Ireland. The Prime Minister and I also talked about our respective visits to Northern Ireland last week, and I have to say I believe that she is sincere in her desire to avoid a hard border on the island. And like me, she wants to see the political institutions back up and running. But we need to be realistic and recognise that Brexit has serious implications for Northern Ireland politics. So I think it's in all of our interests to see Brexit resolved sensibly as soon as possible, which in turn can help to reinstate political stability and hope there. We also have to acknowledge that the consequences of a no-deal Brexit could have profound implications for Northern Ireland as well as the island as a whole. And I know that community representatives on all sides are concerned about how that might play out. It would be a very unwelcome complication to already strained relations between the political parties and in efforts to restore the institutions. And it could add to unease among the communities. Northern Ireland farmers and businesses could be among those most severely impacted in economic terms, and the rights and benefits currently enjoyed by citizens could be curtailed or made more difficult to access. So the government is very mindful of all of these concerns in our determination to reach an agreement that minimises any of these negative sequelae. However, deal or no deal, government will continue to take into account the very real concerns of people and businesses in all parts of the island in the weeks and months ahead, and will work with all political parties and the British government. Amidst all of the uncertainty, I know that some people feel that Brexit has changed the rules of engagement, and perhaps it has. But on that point, I should say that it is our view as a government that now is not the time for talk of border poles north of the border. It is our strong belief that this only serves to sow division and increase fear at a highly sensitive time. The Good Friday Agreement, which we've all worked so hard to protect in the Brexit negotiations, is the foundation for all political engagement and wider relationships in Northern Ireland between North and South and also East-West. We've no hidden agenda in this regard. We believe in the Good Friday Agreement and, most importantly, believe in the philosophy that led to it. So it's in all of our interests that the withdrawal agreement between the EU and the UK be secured, and we welcome Westminster's ambition to avoid no deal. While we are investing all possible efforts to secure a deal, we have to recognise the real possibility that a no-deal outcome is real until it's removed. So we have to be ready for all possible outcomes. Last week in Brussels, President Juncker and I discussed detailed contingency planning underway at both domestic and EU level. We're intensifying our planning for no deal. It's no longer contingency planning, it's planning for a very real and possible outcome. So this includes a commitment from the European Union that programmes that provide assistance cross-border for peace and reconciliation of huge value in the border counties in Ireland and Northern Ireland will continue and be strengthened no matter what happens. And by that I mean peace and interreg. I also explained to President Juncker the assistance that Ireland would require to deal with the specific challenges faced by business in the event of a no-deal exit, especially for our farmers, our fishermen, our haulage, transport and logistics sectors, agri-food and our exporters. For his part, he emphasised that the Commission stands ready to help Ireland in finding and funding solutions to the specific challenges that we might face, and will continue to work closely together to this end over the coming weeks. We also continue to remind the Government of the United Kingdom of its responsibilities under the Good Friday Agreement, whether we come to a deal or not. In December, as you'll be aware, we published our contingency action plan, which set out our approach for dealing with the no-deal Brexit. And last month we published a draft Brexit bill, which includes actions to protect our citizens, support the economy, enterprise and jobs. We'll also put provisions in place in sectors where major challenges associated with the no-deal Brexit have been identified, such as all-island transport, railways, buses, and of course, electricity and energy. Timelines are very tight, so we're working closely with the opposition parties in the Oireachtas to ensure that the legislation will be in place on the 29th of March. We expect to publish it next week. And I have to say, as head of government, I'm grateful for the broadly constructive role that opposition parties have played, which stands in stark contrast to events that we witness across the water. The government's overall objectives are exactly what they were 2 years ago: to minimise the impact on trade and our economy as a result of Brexit, to protect the peace process, including avoiding a hard border, to maintain the common travel area and all the rights and freedoms that flow from that, and to reinforce our commitment and participation in the European Union. These continue to guide our approach, regardless of the type of Brexit we end up with. And whatever the outcome, we will be prepared. So I want to finish by thanking all of you for participating in today's dialogue. And I hope that you'll find the discussions useful and informative, and that you will take this opportunity to have your voices heard and to input into our planning. I also particularly want to thank the various panellists and moderators who are making this event today possible. And once again, I want to thank Tom on behalf of all of us for giving us his time to guide and manage these important discussions. Thank you very much.
Taoiseach, thank you very much for that very comprehensive and up-to-date summary of the situation. One of the most important parts of this succession of civic dialogues has been the opportunity to have the range of political voices from across the island speak to us. And so we're going to go directly on to that section of the programme now. And could I start by inviting Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin to the stage.
Bwala mo bhéchas a gháil tám agus gacéine tá freigrach as agrú na hocáide seo. Mar gan áras tá cnú seo rítheachtach I ggóhéics an Brexit, cé cópráineach is atá an cheist ag an bóta seo. When the first civic dialogue meeting was held in November 2016, the most important consistent issue raised by people was not only that they wanted as soft as Brexit as possible, but they wanted clarity on what they had to plan for. There was an understanding of the need to be ready for whatever might happen, to invest in diversifying markets and products, and to provide significant support in advance of Brexit taking place. There was a hope and expectation that when Brexit took place, we would have completed not just planning, but actually implementing major new investments. The situation today is that the laws of both the European Union and the United Kingdom say that Brexit will happen in 42 days' time, unless an alternative is both negotiated and ratified before then. As things stand, our level of preparedness is at very best uncertain, and there is a genuine concern amongst businesses and communities about what they are facing into. There is no useful purpose to be served today by going over the events of the last 2.5 years to remind ourselves of the combination of ignorance and ideology which has characterised the behaviour of Brexit's fanatical supporters in London. It's been very clear for a long time that they will not budge in the face of evidence or reason. Europe's solidarity for Ireland remains strong, and it will remain fully intact. There is no scenario where Europe will force Ireland to accept a deal which it opposes. We have no substantive information available to us about what technical discussions are underway or any private discussions about concrete steps which might avoid a crash in 6 weeks' time. Along with you, we assume and hope that there is more happening than has been acknowledged by the government. Our concern today needs to be laser-like on how to manage the coming months to limit the damage inflicted on Ireland. And we should all be very clear in understanding that the damage is already underway. The budget announced last year included as its core assumption a best-case situation of a ratification of the current deal. And this showed that national income in 2019 would be roughly 2% lower than with the Remain scenario. Since then, growth figures have been lowered, and we've had two very serious projections from the Department of Finance and the Central Bank of Ireland. The Department of Finance says that a nearly €1 billion hole will appear in public finances this year if there is no deal, with the situation next year being many times worse. Employment will be lower, with Indigenous companies being particularly badly hit, and certain sectors bearing a disproportionate impact. The government has accepted that this is a very conservative forecast. The Central Bank agrees with the Department of Finance on the scale of the damage, but says it will hit faster and harder. The evidence is that there are many preparations underway, but we will certainly not be fully ready for a no-deal scenario in 6 weeks' time. Many of the figures for firms undertaking basic initial steps are impressive, but all of the data on completion of preparations show at best a patchy situation. For example, the need for major investment has been acknowledged by the Brexit loan scheme, which is primarily funded by the European Investment Bank. As of the latest figures we have been given, 5% of this was allocated by mid-last month, and if every single qualified application is sanctioned, at most 1/4 of the fund will be allocated before Brexit takes effect, and a fraction of this will have been spent. In terms of trained staff in place, legislation enacted, investments underway, and emergency supports announced, there is simply no way to describe Ireland as Brexit ready today. The urgency could not be greater, and the stakes could not be higher. We need a level of application and delivery in the coming months which will be a step change from current practice. And there is space to do this. Ireland's is the only minority government in Europe which has received a guarantee that it can govern without worrying about an election at this critical phase in Brexit. And this includes countries which also face severe Brexit threats. My party is being criticised on a near daily basis for this decision. Certainly, the route of all-out opposition is easier. But when you look at the scale of the Brexit threat, I believe we are right to say that our country simply cannot afford the added risk of spending up to 4 months holding an election and forming a government. It was the right decision, and we stand by it. As we've all seen in Belfast, the absence of a functioning government and assembly can cause immense damage to the public interest. It's simply incomprehensible in the context of the grave threat that Brexit poses to the livelihoods and jobs of many people on the island. As the record shows, it has been our consistent policies at these forums to be constructive. Indeed, we have been speaking about Brexit preparations for over a year before the referendum was even held. We believe the government has serious issues to answer about strategic errors and the gap between spin and delivery, while it also has benefited from a consensus which has left normal standards of scrutiny to one side. However, these are matters which have to wait. For now, we have to focus on concrete actions on Brexit. We need much greater clarity and urgency. In spite of being asked on a daily basis in the Dáil, the government has not answered the basic question of what will happen on the border in 6 weeks' time if there is no deal. We know what is not being planned and what is not being contemplated. But what actually is being planned? We also need clarity on what sectoral supports will be implemented and when they will be implemented if there is a chaotic Brexit. We can't let the damage happen before we step in. We need hard details of what is to be done and how much is involved. As part of this, we have to move away from the emphasis on investment schemes, which are subsidised loans rather than grants. Many firms are faced with not being able to commit to the scale of borrowing they need to undertake to replace lost markets. The fact that one investment scheme announced in late 2017 has so far not transferred a single cent to a business shows we need a more ambitious and generous approach. And we need an assessment, not just of how much is being planned, but what its impact is. I asked the Taoiseach this week if he knew how many businesses would be fully Brexit ready on March the 29th, and the answer was no. We need a hard assessment of exactly where we will be on March the 29th, or at any date that Brexit is delayed until. Because I believe we will have an extension of the Article 50 process until mid-year. And this is time we badly need. We know the scale of the threat, and we know what we have to do to overcome it. Finally, on behalf of my party, I would like to thank the hundreds of businesses and organisations which have made the time to brief us on their concerns. I encourage you to keep doing this and to assure you that we will continue to raise these concerns at all available opportunities. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Micheál. Could I now invite Mary Lou MacDonald on behalf of Sinn Féin?
Gur míle maith go Tom agus dia Yves a gcuine úsle. Tá sé seachtainna agin chuig Brexit agus tá dúshlán mór rowan. Tá iarracht déanta ag príomhhara na Breataine a comhaontú a bhriсе leis an Aontas Eorpach. We meet undoubtedly at Cathaoirleach at a time of great challenge. We're just 6 weeks out now from Brexit, and the British Prime Minister has effectively binned her agreement with the European Union. In London, it's clear that the system is in a deepening crisis of competing agendas. The British Prime Minister is counting down the clock, demanding a renegotiation of her own agreement. And we do now face a possible no-deal crash due either to British government belligerence, or plain incompetence. And no one knows exactly where Brexit will land or crash. What we do know is that there is no good Brexit, hard or soft. It's a question of the degree of damage done. Brexit will have a negative impact on trade, on the cost of doing business, on people's livelihoods, on citizens' rights, on our peace process, and on Irish-British relations. It's worth remembering that not alone did people in the north of Ireland vote to remain, but no part of Ireland has consented to Brexit, nor will it. In the north, the majority of elected representatives oppose Brexit. There is a shared position, north and south, to stand in the interests of all who share this island. And that means opposition to Brexit and the imposition of a hard border in Ireland. And it also means a common purpose with the support of our European partners to support the withdrawal agreement and the Irish Protocol, or the backstop as it's called. And I believe collectively we need to stand firm in the face of pressure from Britain. The government there is engaged in a very reckless game of chicken, and I don't believe that anyone on this island can or should blink. The withdrawal agreement is imperfect, but it will mitigate against the worst excesses of Brexit. The backstop contained within it is a vital insurance policy, and it represents the bare minimum of what we need. It may never be deployed, but the backstop is that guarantee in all circumstances of no hard border on our island. It's necessary and it's required, and Theresa May is well aware of this. She told us so in the lead up to Christmas. The British Prime Minister has, in my view, demonstrated enormous bad faith within this process. The backstop is here to stay unless and until a better legally binding agreement is put in place, and the British government needs to understand that. It's time for them to honour their agreement and to move on to talk about the future relationship. That means investing in infrastructure, supporting business, and most crucially, safeguarding the rights of citizens to ensure that no citizen is ever left behind again. Brexit belongs to the Conservative Party and the people of Britain, and if they wish to leave, we wish them well. But the Good Friday Agreement belongs here. It belongs to us. And Tory policy in London cannot by accident or design lead to the imposition of an EU frontier across our island. The Good Friday Agreement is, I believe, the ultimate backstop. It sets out a mechanism for us whereby if the border cannot be mitigated, well, then it can be removed. So we need to plan for all eventualities and outcomes. Some in this room will argue that we do that for all possibilities except one, and that is Irish unity. I think that's an absurdity. I think it's an irresponsible absurdity, because the genie is out of the bottle and the demand for unity is growing based on common sense and national self-interest. And now is the time to look to the future. We need an all-Ireland conversation and a forum, something like this, to look to the future and to plan for all possible outcomes, to look beyond Brexit, to look beyond partition, to look at how we live together, how we work together, how we share this island, because the momentum for change is moving in that direction. I believe not alone do we have a responsibility to look to a new and united Ireland. I think it is an absolute imperative for every interest that is gathered here in this forum, and I wish you well in your deliberations today. Go raibh míle maith agaibh go léir.
Thank you indeed, Mary Lou. Could I now invite Daniel McCrossan on behalf of the SDLP? Thank you.
Thank you. It's very good to be here in Dublin today to share in this important conversation. and to discuss the big challenges that we face as an island. I'd like to also thank the Taoiseach for his address and sharing the government's position with us. As rightly articulated, it is now 42 days until the UK leave the European Union. And I believe it is deplorable and reprehensible that we are in a situation today of not knowing what will happen, not knowing how Brexit will impact our businesses, cross-border trade, or even the rights of Irish men and women living on both sides of the border. As an MLA representing a border constituency, I hear day and daily very genuine and sincere concerns over the fear of a border. And I want to make it clear, there can be no return of the past, and there can be no return of any hard border dividing the people of this island. We need to remain united across this island. We need to ensure that the backstop is fully and totally protected. We need to protect the Good Friday Agreement from being dismantled by the British government and the DUP. We stand with all parties in the South to protect the Irish interests, and we stand with the majority of representatives in the North to protect the backstop. The backstop is so vitally important to ensure the fluidity of trade, travel and cross-border investment. It is not a backstop if it is time-limited. Any deviation from this that would include customs posts and security forces like the past paints a very dark and worrying picture for the future of relationships across this island between governments, organisations and its people. One thing is for certain. People in the North feel abandoned. They feel neglected and feel that at this very crucial and critical time facing all of the peoples of this island, that we haven't even got a government to represent us in the North. A regrettable situation. And if you look at Stormont, you can clearly see why. Sinn Féin and the DUP have left the stage, leaving a vacuum of power that should be used to fight Brexit and represent the greater interests of the 56% of people who voted Remain and who want their European identities protected. Our public bodies are also inextricably linked to the European Union, to its laws, regulations and to its directives. It is part of the very fabric of their operations, to capital spend and future planning. Yet they are facing uncertain times. They are lacking political leadership and are going into a potential hard Brexit blindfolded. It is my fear, and the fear of the SDLP, that a no-deal Brexit will plunge the North into a prolonged recession, and it will be the people who will be left to pick up the pieces. Added to that uncertainty is whether or not we will have a government in the North to help us do that. It is incumbent on all political parties, both north and south of this island, to remain steadfast in opposing Brexit, in securing the backstop, and in preventing a hard border across this island. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Daniel, could I now invite Stephen Farry, MLA, on behalf of the Alliance Party?
Garmuagat. Can I first of all start by putting on record my thanks to both the Irish Government and the European Union for their understanding and defence of the Good Friday Agreement and the commitment to maintaining an open border on the island, and in turn to say with a degree of regret that the UK Government doesn't share that same degree of commitment and analysis from their actions, particularly over the past number of weeks. We come from this from the perspective that there is no such thing as a good or sensible Brexit. It is a huge self-inflicted wound that will have long-term implications, in particular for the UK, but indeed for all of the European Union. From our perspective, in a descending order of preference, we see three ways through the current Brexit conundrum. First of all, we do want to see a people's vote and the whole Brexit process reconsidered. And while it is somewhat going off the agenda in London, we haven't entirely given up on that particular pathway. Secondly, we would prefer to see a soft Brexit UK-wide, with the UK as a whole staying inside both the customs union and single market. And that would, amongst other things, avoid any discussion of the need of a border in Ireland. And then thirdly, we want to see a special deal for Northern Ireland if either of those two options are taken off the table. But to be very clear, any form of negotiated Brexit does require the withdrawal agreement, and that in turn requires the backstop. And that backstop has to be open-ended and all-weather. To do anything other than that, it is not a backstop as such. And I do welcome the ongoing commitment, and not least what's been said today, from both the Irish Government and the European Union to stand by the commitments that they have made in that particular respect. The bottom line is that the only means you can avoid a border in Ireland is through having sufficient regulatory alignment and a shared customs territory through either the entire UK or Northern Ireland being aligned with the European Union. There has been a lot of misplaced talk and indeed controversy around the backstop, and I want to make a few things clear in this respect. First of all, this is not a constitutional question. This is a pragmatic intervention to protect the particular circumstances of Northern Ireland and a situation that was imposed upon us and is not of our making. Northern Ireland only works through sharing and interdependence, and Brexit brings the threat of new divisions and new barriers, and that has to be combated. It builds on existing precedents and shouldn't be a threat in that regard. And indeed, it, if ever was to inform the future relationship, could provide an opportunity for Northern Ireland to have the best of both worlds through the bridges not borders concept afoot in both particular camps. It's also important to recognise that Brexit has become, unfortunately, a rather polarised issue within Northern Ireland to a certain extent, but that does need to be qualified at the same time. And while I do very much respect people's right to argue for constitutional change on the island and recognise that the constitutional question is open in a way that hasn't been for quite some time, it is nonetheless important not to conflate Brexit with that process, because in particular it's important that Brexit is seen as and combating Brexit is seen as a cross-community endeavour within Northern Ireland, because there is cross-community support for Brexit. And we should in particular welcome the unprecedented level of consensus and articulation of that consensus from the business community, the farming interests, civic society that we have seen over the past number of months in Northern Ireland. The backstop is not something that's been imposed upon Northern Ireland from the outside, from which we need to be saved. It is something that has been asked for by the people of Northern Ireland and is supported by a majority of the people of Northern Ireland. In closing, I just want to make some comments in relation to the no-deal situation. We are seeing the UK government continuing to indulge in a situation of chasing unicorns and indulging around a number of delusions. If there is a game of chicken being played here, it is an incredibly dangerous game, with the economy of Northern Ireland being a plaything. It is important that we have clarity as soon as possible, because businesses need that clarity. They can't simply wait to the 29th of March. Decisions have to be made now around investment, and there will be consequences in jobs if there's not clarification in that regard. I would also urge, as much as possible, that both the jurisdictions on the island to talk to one another around the no-deal planning and build upon the work that has been done to date. And this is more than simply how we avoid a physical border. It's how we plan in terms of the future of services, things like data management, and understand the problems that come from the potential of two different legal jurisdictions emerging in terms of the European Union. And finally, our agri-food sector is particularly vulnerable, as is the situation in the south of Ireland. And if there is any potential for assistance to come from the European Union, given the integration that we have on a north-south basis in terms of agri-food, I would make this appeal that some consideration can be given to how we can protect farmers and the agri-food sector in our part of the world as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. It's now my pleasure to invite Minister Shane Ross on behalf of the Independent Alliance.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. As you're all no doubt well aware, the Government remains firmly of the view that the best and only way to ensure an orderly UK withdrawal from the EU is to ratify the withdrawal agreement. However, given the continued and ongoing uncertainty in the UK, we have advanced our preparations for a no-deal Brexit. As we get closer to the 29th of March, I think it's important to say that without an EU-UK agreement, we simply cannot maintain the almost seamless arrangements that we currently have between the EU and the UK as an EU member state. If the UK becomes a third country on the 29th of March, without having ratified the withdrawal agreement with the EU, then EU rules in the field of air, road, rail and maritime transport will no longer apply to the UK. As Minister for Transport, the key challenges that I have been faced with range from aviation connectivity to working to make sure that our hauliers can continue to move to and through the UK, and that cross-border public transport services can continue to operate. We've made some significant progress over the past 2 months on some of our biggest and most serious challenges. Take the case of aviation, and especially connectivity. The European Commission has put forward a draft legislative proposal that will ensure that flights between the EU and UK can continue in the event of no deal, providing certainty to the Irish aviation sector and to the travelling public. Similarly, in the area of international road haulage, we were facing a very difficult no-deal scenario where we would have no adequate fallback position for our hauliers to enter the UK and to travel through it for onward destinations in Europe and beyond. Following strong representations from Ireland and from other concerned member states, the European Commission has put forward a proposal to temporarily adopt measures for a 9-month period from the 29th of March to allow access for UK hauliers to the EU to ensure basic road connectivity. This is subject to the UK allowing access into the UK for EU hauliers. While both the proposed aviation and road haulage EU Commission measures are temporary only, they do eliminate the immediate risk from March 2019 and allow us time and space to find alternative, more permanent arrangements. As with all contingency measures that the Commission has put forward, these measures are not intended to and cannot mitigate the overall impact of a no-deal scenario, nor can they replicate the full benefits of EU membership or the terms of the transition period as provided for in the withdrawal agreement. Our ports and airports must be able to continue to facilitate the importing of goods from the UK as a third country. The Irish Government's focus is therefore on ensuring that Dublin Port, Rossall Airport and Dublin Airport are prepared for this, and the OPW has been tasked with delivering the required facilities for the agriculture, health and customs checks at these locations. This work is ongoing at speed. I'm also very concerned, as I'm sure many of you are, about any potential disruption to and our reliance on the UK as a land bridge. A substantial proportion of our exports and imports, including many time-sensitive or perishable goods, are transported via this route. The Irish Maritime Development Office carried out a study for my department concerning the implications of Brexit on the use of the UK land bridge. The study, which was published last year, found that 3 million tonnes of merchandise trade with the EU moves between Ireland and the EU continent via the UK land bridge. The IMDO estimated that this equates to approximately 150,000 heavy goods vehicles every year. The total value of our trade using the land bridge was estimated to be 21 billion euros. Disruption or delays on the Dover-Calais maritime link could considerably impact on hauliers and Irish businesses and is of major concern. Certain sectors are very reliant on the land bridge route. This trade is largely time-sensitive products such as agri-food, where the shorter journey times and high frequency of sailings allows a quicker route to market than direct sailings to continental EU ports. These sectors would be particularly adversely affected by any deterioration in transit times or increase in costs, particularly in a no-deal scenario. Land Bridge Project Group, chaired by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and including officials from my own department, the Revenue Commissioners, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine and others, has been working closely with the European Commission and other affected member states, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark and Sweden, with a view to preparing EU ports to facilitate the transit of EU products through the UK once it becomes a third country through the use of EU rules on internal transit set out under the Union's Custom Code. In this context, I met my French counterpart, Minister Bourne, in November, and highlighted to her the importance of transport connectivity and our concerns in relation to the continued use of the UK, of the land bridge. Of course, one of the main topics at the forefront of everybody's mind in the tourism sector is the unprecedented challenges posed by Brexit. In the short term, the immediate impact has been the drop in the value of sterling, and from a tourism perspective, we are now a more expensive destination for UK visitors. Since the referendum, the Irish government has had a clear focus on our overall priorities: protecting the peace process, no hard border, maintenance of common travel area, and an effective transitional arrangement leading to the closest possible trading relationship with the United Kingdom. These overall priorities are also vital to the continued growth of tourism. North-South cooperation has made an important contribution through the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement to the improvement of people's lives on the island. We want to ensure that this cooperation continue in a meaningful way. This is very clear in the case of tourism, where under the Good Friday Agreement, tourism was specifically designated as an area for North-South cooperation, and Tourism Ireland is responsible for the overseas marketing of the island of Ireland as a tourist destination. The Irish government increased funding to tourism by 26% in budget 2019. It's the largest increase in the tourist budget in 15 years, including an almost 50% increase in capital investment. Funding of 7.9 million has been allocated to the tourism agencies in 2019, specifically to ensure that the tourism sector is Brexit ready. Tourism Ireland is implementing a series of actions in the British market to address the decline in visitor numbers since the Brexit vote. Looking beyond Britain, Tourism Ireland continues to roll out its market diversification strategy, which focuses greater resources on attracting visitors from those markets who stay longer and spend more while on holiday. In 2019, Fáilte Ireland is implementing a programme which places a focus on retaining businesses from Northern Ireland and Britain, whilst also offering supports to enterprises to equip them for the post-Brexit marketplace. 2019 will undoubtedly and is already presenting challenges, not least the continued uncertainty. It may impact on consumer confidence and in turn on outbound travel from Britain. Competitiveness and value for money will continue to be a key message in Britain this year. I've no doubt that the sector is resilient and robust enough to meet the challenge of Brexit, and that we will continue to grow tourism in Ireland in a sustainable way into the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Minister Ross. I'd now like to invite Joan Burton on behalf of the Labour Party. Thank you.
"42 days is basically a working month when you take out the weekends and you take out the St. Patrick's Day festivities. So we really are at 5 minutes to 12 in relation to Brexit. And like others, as far as the Irish Labour Party is concerned, the backstop, the safety net is absolutely essential, and there can be no dilution of that. Border controls will have profoundly negative consequences for communities on both sides of the border. And I think and hope that today we'll see a focus on practical issues. For example, changes in insurance, vehicle insurance requirements, that nobody actually knows for certain what will happen if Britain drops to third country status. We also need to know more about what will happen to hauliers, the queues that they will go into or the lanes they'll go into, both at the British ports and at the French and European ports, returning to Ireland or arriving in Europe. And we need to know much more about what the arrangements are, not just in places like Dover, but in Calais as well. And I do think that the government should use today to really explain to businesses what the detailed implications are likely to be, and to set up phone lines and contact points where people can get precise information for their particular needs. Last week, I was in the United States as part of a Dáil cross-party delegation to the new Congress. And I can say that people in the Congress, particularly the incoming chairman, the Democratic chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is effectively the budgetary committee and the most powerful committee in the US Congress, were thankfully extremely aware of the consequences for the Belfast Agreement, of which America is a very proud supporter and played a very significant role, that does need to be protected. And people like Congressman Boyle in the new Congress have already begun to move motions which would indicate, notwithstanding the very friendly relationship between Britain and the UK as long-standing allies, that any undermining of the Belfast Agreement, of the Good Friday Agreement, would in fact bode very ill in terms of any rapid trade deal with the United States. And I think when the Taoiseach and others go to the States, they need to follow up on that to ensure that not only do we continue to get the support we have been receiving from the European Union, but that we ensure that the United States, as one of the parties to the Belfast Agreement, becomes actively engaged on behalf, particularly of communities on both sides of the border. I would say to the government again in the context of today that unfortunately the government has left the detailed legislation arrangements very, very late in the day. And speaking as somebody in opposition, I would say we need far more legal information on the details of what the government is proposing so that we can in turn transmit that to businesses and to enterprises right across the island as to what the practical consequences are likely to be. Because I think for a lot of small businesses, a lot of fishing and agricultural businesses are relatively small in number. They're inevitably going to face demands for potentially large amounts of additional paperwork. And paperwork and bureaucracy is going to cost those businesses a lot of money, which they don't necessarily have. So there really will have to be a very detailed dialogue between business and government agencies as to how to minimise the disruption, or whether, in fact, perhaps by accident, a much more bureaucratic approach is adopted. And I think it might be good to have some of those conversations today, because we have a lot of people in the audience here who've travelled from the north and all over the Republic, who have that experience of what's likely to happen and what will cause them difficulties unless there is clarity. And as I say, in working times, normal working times, we just have 4 weeks left. It would seem to me, looking at the House of Commons yesterday, we are in a very uncertain situation. We have, unfortunately, no administration or devolved government in operation at the moment in the north. That's an enormous pity. Keir Starmer, the British Labour Party spokesperson on Brexit, was in Dublin this week. The proposals from Keir Starmer on behalf of the British Labour Party in terms of a customs union and a single market and close alignment, that certainly offers a way out to the United Kingdom to have a much more conciliatory and structured approach to their departure from the European Union. Certainly, I hope that what we witnessed yesterday is not repeated again, because it would seem now that a vote in Parliament is now only a significant vote if it's a meaningful vote. And judging by what the British government are planning, they may not have those votes until very close to the departure date. And again, I appreciate that's a problem for our government, but as has been said before, all of the opposition parties have been extremely supportive of having a collective and a collaborative approach to Brexit, both in terms of the Republic, but actually on an all-island basis. So welcome to everyone who's travelled today, and we will listen very carefully to insights and advice that you may offer us. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Thank you, Joan. Now, on behalf of Solidarity People Before Profit, could I invite Richard Boyd Barrett? Thank you.
As a party that has elected representatives both north and south, and as thoroughgoing internationalists, we oppose borders or divisions between human beings, whether they're north-south, whether they're east-west, or for that matter, whether they're on the frontiers of Europe and on the Mediterranean. And from that point of view, barriers, borders, or checks between east and west make absolutely no sense. But a border north and south would be an utter disaster that has to be avoided at all costs, and would summon up the very real possibility of a return to the dark days of conflict and violence. For that reason, I disagree with the Taoiseach that it is not justified or legitimate to talk about the possibility of a border poll. I don't think you have to be a nationalist or a Republican to believe that if there is any prospect of a border that could drag us back to the dark days of division and conflict on purely democratic grounds, people north and south should have the right to make a decision as to whether they want that or not, whether that is acceptable or not. It is obvious that Theresa May and the British political establishment more generally are hostage to extreme political forces that are willing to risk that peace and that security on this island, and their politics more generally echoes in a very alarming way the dangerous, xenophobic, extremist politics of Trump, of Orban, and of forces of the far right across Europe, which should be very alarming to all of us. So we need to make it very clear to Theresa May that under no circumstances are we willing to accept a border north and south, because peace and security on this island is more important than politics or markets. The danger from the Tory Brexiteers and the extremists in the British political system is obvious. But I will also say we have concerns about noises and comments from Europe, and indeed from our own government, about, in the circumstances of a no-deal Brexit, that somehow a border may become inevitable, possibly to protect the integrity of the European single market. I do not accept that. I don't think we should make a single concession to that. The European single market comes second to the absolute necessity of ensuring no border north and south to prevent a return to conflict and division. And I think we need to say that categorically that from any direction, for any reason, a border north and south is simply not acceptable and will not be tolerated, and that we will not cooperate with it in any shape or form. And I'll conclude by saying that if, and let's hope reason prevails, and let's hope that a deal is done to ensure both the absence of barriers east and west, the absence of a border north and south, but in the event of a no deal, I think it is critically important that we say people down here will oppose any attempt to introduce a border north and south for any reason, but also we need to insist that the solidarity that is promised from the European Union in terms of protecting people on this island from the impact of a no-deal Brexit will be real and practical, and that state aid rules or free market rules in the European Union will not be used as an impediment or excuse to giving real practical support to working people, to small business, or to any other sectors that could be adversely impacted by the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. That is our view. Let's hope common sense prevails, but I think we need to lay down clear markers, if it doesn't, of the things that we want and the things that we will not accept. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. On behalf of the Social Democrats, Angus O'Malley, please.
I'd like to start by commending in the highest possible terms the very impressive work that has been done by the businesses, the civil society organisations and the business organisations represented here today in preparing our society and our industry for the coming departure of the UK from the EU. I'd also like to congratulate our public servants in the Department of Foreign Affairs and elsewhere that have done so much to ensure that our needs are respected, understood and supported during the negotiation process. The decision made to leave the EU by the UK is one that we in the Social Democrats disagree with and feel was a mistake, but as a democratic choice made by the people of the UK, it is one that we respect. And in 1998, people on both sides of this island also made a democratic decision to sign up to the Good Friday Agreement. In London, as in Brussels, that decision must also be respected. Its provisions not only respected, but acted on and fully implemented, regardless of the choice of the UK to leave the EU. The negotiations between the EU 27 and the UK's government have been extremely difficult, but the deal on the table now is fair and is not just rhetorically, but also practically the best deal possible for both the EU and the UK in the circumstances. But whether the deal can be implemented with so little time left until Brexit Day is a question left waiting for an answer, and we find ourselves waiting yet again for parliamentary arithmetic in Westminster to finally align. And let us continue to hope that it will, and that a disorderly Brexit is averted come March. And I heard recently a disturbing phrase which is catching on. Small businesses can't afford to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, and big businesses can't afford not to. Irish businesses have been told by government for the last 2.5 years that a disorderly Brexit was simply unthinkable. And sadly, as a result of that communication strategy, many have simply put it out of their minds. Now, though, there are serious cracks opening in this optimism which need to be addressed. The Brexit loan scheme, for one example, was a great help for businesses who knew about it and who had the time and the resources to dedicate to taking advantage of it. But for the majority of small and medium enterprises, that was simply not possible in practice. Just on Wednesday, the Governor of the Central Bank, Philip Lane, listed the impacts of a no-deal scenario on Ireland, outsized on rural areas and obviously outsized on the border. While again I congratulate the sterling work done by the organisations represented here, it is unfortunate, to say the least, that more has not been done from central government to mitigate this very foreseeable risk over the course of the last 2.5 years. And then after Brexit Day, and given the intransigence and the slow pace of negotiations that brought us to this point, it's hard not to be pessimistic about talks on the future trade relationship between the EU and the UK. Time is short. The consequences of failing to support our society and industry at this juncture could be enormous. The government now has to go out of its way to ensure that we are as well prepared as possible should the worst case play out. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Angus. On behalf of the Green Party, Eamon Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We very much welcome an all-island dialogue. And I welcome the article by Jeffrey Donaldson in the Sunday Independent last Sunday, calling for exactly that, an all-island dialogue. What he said was it common ground we need to seek for common sense solutions? But the difficulty is, I asked the Taoiseach yesterday in the Dáil, and I think he's correct, where could we find these solutions? And I think, Taoiseach, what you said yesterday is correct. It has to come from London in the immediate stage. And the problem is, London's like a dog that's chasing its own tail, and until that fast spinning stops, how do we even intervene? Well, I think we should do what I've been saying maybe the four of these previous dialogues that we've held here in Dublin Castle. Maybe we can, in the interim, look at some really practical measures where we can achieve common sense agreement. In energy, the UK is never going to sell electricity to Singapore or India or any trade deal like that. In fact, they have a real problem because their wholesale electricity prices is 50% higher than the continent. Their service industries are threatened in a no-deal scenario. They need interconnection and cooperation in electricity, and we need it too. We will not be able to achieve our climate objectives if we go it alone, either north-south or east-west. We need to cooperate. Taoiseach, if you say the British Irish Council is a forum where we could discuss some of this, is the next meeting in March, I understand? Well, then I think we should put energy right centre in the agenda there where we can get agreement. Agreement on building our interconnectors. Agreement on how we put 5 gigawatts in our side of the Irish Sea, which is what we all know now we need to do, of offshore wind power. Agreement on how we get gas security. I don't think we're going to get any more gas from the west of this island. We're going to need, as we manage climate change, the security of gas from the east, from the UK, and the UK in turn will need it from further east, from Norway and Holland. They're the physical realities that no amount of political spin can ignore. So let's cooperate on energy to try and get back to talking to each other. Secondly, in education, my colleague Stephen Agnew and now Claire Bailey have been consistently arguing that the Irish government in our European position should be standing up for all citizens in the Northern Ireland. And Taoiseach, I know you agree with this, but we need to win that case in Europe. So that whatever, I'm glad to hear you say that the common travel arrangements are going to survive no matter what, but I think we need to go further to make sure that each side of a peace wall, that the student has the opportunity to get Erasmus to the rest of Europe in any future arrangements, whatever they may be. So we don't have that divide in education in the north, whatever the Brexit outcome may be. And lastly, in environmental cooperation, Michael Ewing, the head of the Irish Environmental Network, told me earlier that they're about to produce a major paper in how we can cooperate and how we need to cooperate in that area. My colleague, Councillor Mark Deary, lives on the shores of Carlingford Lough. He was telling me yesterday, we don't even really know where the border is in Carlingford Lough. And it's the same on the Foyle. So we're going to have to cooperate. As that salmon sails up and we all want him or her, male or female salmon, to make it home, we're going to have to cooperate. Or as that slurry may seep down into either of those lochs, that's a physical reality that we have to cooperate. It's not political, it's just common sense, which is what I heard Jeffrey Donaldson looking to find. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. And now the final speaker in this panel is Claire Bailey, leader of the Northern Ireland Green Party.
I think you'll all be glad to hear that was the final speaker. But thanks. And I think everybody in this room is aware that Brexit is happening. Many of our businesses are already dealing with Brexit. And they're already trying to work through on their own solutions and their own deals. And while we continually try to frame Brexit within the economic arguments and discussions, we should not forget that Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU. And we are feeling that we're being dragged out against our will And I don't think that that should be forgotten, because it is really, really important, particularly in the context of upholding the Good Friday Agreement. Because the principle of consent was a central issue within that. We've always supported a people's vote on the final deal, because we believe that that's democracy. We went for a referendum, and those who voted in that referendum voted on a whole myriad of different issues for different reasons. There was nothing concrete on the table. There was nothing solid. We didn't know, and we didn't have a government coming forward to tell us what that would be. So when they come to a deal, we believe that the only democratic way forward is to put that to the people and ask, is this what you want? But we'll see if that's, and like Stephen earlier, we're still going to hang on to that one. I don't think that that's completely out of the question yet. But instead we have a lot of no-deal Brexiteers at Westminster advocating for a hard Brexit or for a no-deal Brexit, and who are openly admitting that they've never even read the Good Friday Agreement. The only voice that we have for us at Westminster is through the DUP, who were always anti-agreement. And we have to consider the possibility, the very real thinking, that in Northern Ireland to date we have had a political process and not necessarily a peace process. Because real lives will tell you that story, and who has had the benefits of a peace dividend. Because what we see with our people in the north is soaring levels of poverty, exasperated by welfare reforms. We have more people who've died by suicide in the past 20 years than were ever killed during the years of conflict. We have poor unemployment and this new category of economically inactive, the highest level in the whole of the UK. We have victims and survivors from our conflict, and those from our historical abuse inquiries have still never been given any reparations, and we have a Secretary of State completely unwilling to step in and help. So that's the real lived lives of the people in Northern Ireland. And I don't believe that a border poll right now is the solution. I think if we're bounced into a border poll as a reaction to Brexit, what we're getting is Brexit Part 2. Because all my life I've heard about the reunification of Ireland or a united Ireland, but still nothing solid, nothing discussed on the table. So if we go for a border poll without having something tangible that we're asking people to vote on, then we have to think Brexit Part 2 on this island for ourselves. So if we want to go down that line, we need to find ways of looking at who is not in this room, because they need to be part of that conversation, and they need to be valid voices. So there is a lot of work to be done. A border poll is not the solution right now, but we can, and I think it is a very valid discussion and political ideology to have, and a very legitimate discussion to be having right now, but it's one that should be had over the next lot of years. So let's be careful about the way forward, and let's not forget the very human cost while we're focusing on the economic and political consequences of Brexit. Thank you.
Claire, thank you very much. And that brings to a conclusion the diverse and very interesting range of political perspectives that we've heard. I know the Taoiseach has to leave us now, but Anya Lawler is going to continue discussing with the Taoiseach on stage about the next stage in Brexit. So, Anya, could I invite you up? Thank you.